All right, so let's get right into the packaging here for the Bakeneko65. I'm pretty sure that's actually how you pronounce it. And I always love when keyboards come in these nice cases. I think Canon Keys does a good job that most of at least their branded keyboards seem to come packaged up real nice in a carrying case, which for 65% is definitely something that you like to see because you might be bringing this with you. So you have your top and your bottom here, and if we're looking at the top, it's all the pieces. The bottom's really just the keyboard. This is going to use some press-in stabilizers, or I believe clip-in stabilizers, and then you're going to have your gasket here because this is a gasket-mounted keyboard, so it's a new build type for us to figure out what's going on. And then just running through all of the parts here as well, you're going to get your USB-C port, but that's just a screw-in into the base. You get some feet and a screwdriver, all in these individually packaged, nice little kind of Ziploc sealed bags, probably anti-static and things like that. And then finally you have an FR4 plate here labeled with Canon Keys right on top. And then your final piece behind this is actually going to be your PCB. And again, you know, with me, packaging is always super important. So really prefer when we're getting these keyboards with the PCB in its own separate packaging, anti-static, all the things you need just to make sure that everything's going to arrive to you safe with no issues. You can see there's even, I think, some holes or something, you know, on this packaging, but overall, love to get just a keyboard, all the pieces ready to go. It has become a preference of mine over the keyboards that kind of come constructed and then I have to spend time taking them apart and things like that. And you kind of like to just jump on in. So let's take a look now at the keyboard itself, which again, since this is a gasket mounted, it's just a single piece. And you can see they come in all of these different colors as well on Canon Keys. So this is one of their greens in their new gen or next gen, which means that it kind of has this texture to it, which is really nice. I think it's a really good color. Again, many choices, but you can go with something that's kind of like a pearl or even some others. And then you can see as well, there's a silicone weight in there. And you do have two options for weights. You can go either with a silicone weight or you can go with a zinc weight. Unfortunately, I don't think they have any zinc weights in stock. So we went with the silicone, which also adds to the price a little bit. That's not the end of the world. I don't think I mentioned it, but all in all, I think we're at about $150 for this keyboard. So relatively affordable, although again, it is a smaller keyboard at that 65%. And there is something to be said about the feel, I think, of the gasket keyboards that maybe doesn't feel quite as premium when you're putting them in, but it's definitely a cool board to build. So getting into the build here, the first thing that we need to do is just to put in the USB-C port, which it's nice that you get kind of all your screws and everything related to the port in this nice little bag. And you can see on the board itself, there's really not that much space for everything, but you got kind of those 4 holes and a little channel for all of these wires. So we're going to go ahead and first get this USB-C port in. So as with anything that we're plugging in here, we just want to make sure that all the pins are lined up and everything goes in. If you haven't built a keyboard before, these do tend to require a little bit of force to get them in. You can usually start them, but you want to make sure everything's tight in there because the last thing we want to do is have to undo everything just to start troubleshooting these issues. But what I will say is on something like this, that's at least much easier since the whole keycaps, PCB, and everything will come out as one if you need to. So after you're done probably losing some screws, if you're me, we're just going to go ahead and tighten everything down for this USB-C port so that way we can get some power to the PCB. And while that's happening, if you guys enjoy the channel, enjoy what I'm doing, please like, comment, and subscribe. Plenty more content coming your way. So once you have your USB-C port in place, and you can see a nice little close-up here, you are pretty much ready to go with the rest of the build. So the wires will hopefully fall into that channel a little bit. You can see there's some extra stuff there, but we're actually going to put the bottom of this keyboard aside for now and get into our PCB. So again, the PCB for this keyboard, much like the Bakeneko65, comes wrapped in its own anti-static bag, which is always nice. I will save you guys the noise of me tearing it open by trying to do this in a voiceover as opposed to just live while we're working on it. So different things are important to different people, but I will say the PCB is pretty nice from Canon keys here. I don't put a huge emphasis on PCBs all the time as long as, hot swap or solder, but overall I was impressed with the quality out of the bag. And I will say that if you are looking at Canon keys for keyboards, make sure you take note of what PCB is included, especially on their stuff, just because I have seen them kind of vary between hot swap and solder more than you would think, because I think hot swap is probably what a lot of people are looking for, don't want to go through soldering, especially if you're only going to build one keyboard. Moving right along, the next piece we have is the stabilizers here. So again, the keyboard kit comes with stabilizers. These are not screw-in stabilizers. They are just clip-in. So that's what you can see here. There's no opening to put a screw in through the PCB. And with any keyboard you get, let's make sure you lube your stabilizers. A lot of people call this a mod. I don't know, I guess it is a modification, but most people are not putting their stabilizers in unlubed. Even if you're buying a pre-built, they're going to tell you that their stabilizers are lubed. So just as you're building your keyboard, don't miss this step while you have everything stripped down. Just make sure that you are lubing your stabilizers. Again, anywhere where there's friction is where you're going to want to do that. You can see on the inside of the housing is what I'm doing, on the outsides of the stem, and then the wire itself that goes into the stabilizer. You also may want to make sure that your stabilizer wires are flat, because this can also cause some problems. So you saw me doing that at a certain point. Just pulled out my phone, which is a reasonably flat surface, lay the wire down, and just make sure that there's no unneeded give on either side, and then you should be good to go. So here we have the stabilizers in place. Again, they are clip-in stabilizers, so they do require a little bit of force when you're putting them in. But the next step for our build is going to be attaching the plate to the PCB. Now for this build, this is going to be held in place by the switches. There's no screws in the back or anything, so the switches are 100% of what's going to be holding these two pieces together, which isn't uncommon. Sometimes people may even choose not to screw in their plates and just count on the switches to hold the plate to the PCB. But since you are also putting a gasket on, it changes things a little bit for this one. We're going to throw in these Durock T1 tactile switches. There will be a video to come on a review of these, but for now, they were what I had on the shelf, and I think they're a pretty good switch. And you guys know I love my tactile switches. So let's go ahead and get these T1s in. And once we have these in, we will move on to actually putting the gasket on. So what you can see here is I made sure to kind of hit the corners of the PCB first, just because again, there's no screws holding the plate to the PCB. So I just wanted everything to sit fairly flat while I was doing this. I will say everything went in super smooth, which is always nice, but it was almost too light. So I did have some things popping out when everything was shifting around because nothing was really holding it together. So once you get all the switches in, there's obviously no issues there, but the initial kind of put it together and get everything, clipped in was more fragile than I'd say some of the other keyboards can be. And once you have all of your switches in, the next piece of this build is actually to put this rubber gasket around everything. And what you need to make sure is that you can see there's a gap here and there isn't a gap in some of it. So you actually kind of need to, what I'm going to call turtleneck the switches, which is you need to have your plate kind of pushed up to the neck of the switches as far as it can go to give yourself that room to apply the gasket. So if you don't have that, what you're going to want to do is what I'm doing here and kind of follow the outside perimeter of everything you have and just kind of give yourself that space so that the gasket will fit in. Now, you can see I'm losing some switches along the way. This is what I was saying, that it felt a little more fragile as I was putting it together, but not really fragile, but maybe loose. But once you get the gasket on, none of this will be a concern. So just try to keep that gap, open for the gasket. And once it's all together, you shouldn't be having any problems. Now, putting the gasket on is basically as simple as you think it is, but if you try to create the gap while you're putting the gasket on, I will warn you, it is a little more tricky because that was the first edit of this video and we've kind of just removed that one. But as long as you have that gap, it goes around. I'm giving it a nice press just to make sure everything's seated in there. But as this gets put into the base of the keyboard, you'll actually kind of do a lot of the setting of this itself. So the main thing is just making sure that everything's staying in place when you have this gasket on, and that nothing's like moving around or falling out like you saw with the switches, and you'll be okay. So we're grabbing the bottom of the keyboard here, and first thing with any keyboard, right, is we need to make the connection. So we're going to go ahead and plug the PCB into the port just so that we can get communication to the keyboard itself. And like I've said before, just make sure you're getting everything in the right way and giving it a little bit of pressure. So there are little stands in this base as well, which is what the keyboard will sit on. So just make sure you get all your wires underneath the keyboard, and then as you push this in, the PCB is naturally going to find its way onto those stands, so you can't push it down too far. And I found once it was in, I could give everything kind of these extra little pushes, and all of a sudden things kind of push together a little bit more, they fit together a little bit better. So highly recommend kind of every step of the way you're doing that so that you're not left with any loose pieces as you go. Now that we have our switches in, our PCB in, it is keycap time. So we are going with the PBT Earl Grey Lavender set from Canon Keys. This is almost a complete Canon Keys build. I'm not sure actually if you can get the Durock T1s on their site, but other than that, everything came from Canon Keys. And this is similar to kind of the Galaxy set that I featured on the KBD67. Everybody seemed to really like that, and I definitely enjoy kind of this purple gray colorway that I seem to just naturally be drawn to. So I think with the green on the keyboard, it will match really well. And overall, I'm continuously impressed with the quality of a set of keycaps for like $70. So let's go ahead and pop these bad boys on. And here we have the final product, the fully built Bakeneko65. It's a really nice little keyboard. I enjoyed the build, partially because it was just a little different with the gasket mount, but overall it's really, really nice, and I'm having a good time with it. So let's hop into a sound test real quick. So what do we think about the Bakeneko65 by Canon Keys? Again, this is actually something that was made by somebody else, and this is the Canon Keys version, but it is readily available from Canon Keys, which I really like. Overall, first purely gasket mounted keyboard, I did enjoy the build. I like that this whole thing just kind of pops out, makes it a little easier. Definitely a really good beginner board, and this is probably going to become my new work keyboard, at least for a little while, just because the sound is actually pretty muffled. I'm not sure if the gasket mounting has something to do with that, but it feels like it does, since there's just more dampening around it, especially maybe even with the silicone weight. There's just a lot of stuff working in my favor to make this not super loud. So it's a really good keyboard at a really good price. And next we're going to actually put this one up against our KBD67 Lite R4 just to see for that 65% layout which one is the better keyboard, at least in my opinion. So stay tuned for that video where we compare those two side by side. Otherwise, appreciate everyone hanging out through another video. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy what I'm doing, and I will see you all in the next one.